I remember living in Seattle, and I'd just gotten laid off as a graphic designer, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I decided that I wanted to go to Art Center College of Design. It's in Pasadena, California. And I remember driving down, all the way down there with my wife, and we ended up passing by this sign, or these two signs. And one said Art Center College of Design, and I was like, oh, I can't wait, because this is where I've always wanted to go. And then the next sign was this thing called NASA JPL. And I was like, whoa, what is that? I knew what NASA was. I wasn't exactly sure what JPL was. And I never imagined that these two things would interact. Well, I ended up going to Art Center as a graphic designer, and I was trying to do what a good graphic designer is supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to do a logo, right? Well, I suck at logos, so I didn't realize that until this moment. And I was really struggling. But fortunately, I met this person that I hope you've met someone like this in your life. He's the kind of person that can look inside your soul and just like rip it out and then hold it in front of you and you go, oh, that's who I am. That's what I'm supposed to do. And he said, Dan, you're too practical. And in fact, you're so practical that you keep yourself in a little box. You need to go play. And you're so practical that you'll take the impractical things that you do when you play and you'll make them practical. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but I thought about it for a little bit, and I was just saying, he told me to go play. So there's this grocery store that sells 500 kinds of soda, but they're all in glass bottles. And that was sort of the essence of this place. And I'm always looking for what is the essence of something. And I thought, okay, well, let's play with the bottle, because the bottle, they use sugar cane in that instead of corn syrup, and plus it just tastes better out of a bottle, right? And so I started to play around with bottles and made little sculptures and thought, oh, I could light them up different ways. I thought, oh, I could light them up on top of their building. Wouldn't that be fun? But I love the way in which they sound when you blow on them. And so I stuck them on top of my car, and I don't know if you can read this. It says, does not work. It looks pretty cool, though. Eventually, I got my friend, and he'd push it up and down, and that didn't work either. But eventually, at the right angle and the right distance, it made this beautiful noise, like woo, 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 woo. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. And it was really about the speed of an ice cream truck driving around. So I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to make a taco truck stand drive around with making music? And then my friend, she has perfect pitch, and she could go around to all the bottles and told me the exact note of what all these different bottles were. And I don't know anything about music, and this is sort of the story of my life, is that I don't know how to do pretty much anything that I end up trying to do, but I find that if you find the right people, you make the right team, you're able to do a lot of things that you could never do on your own. So I drew this thing out. This is the best drawing that I could do. I still can't draw, but this was a pipe organ, and so I thought, oh, wouldn't it be really cool to make a pipe organ out of these soda pop bottles? I knew I needed air. I knew there were bottles. I didn't know what this thing was, but after asking lots of people, eventually they told me it was a solenoid. And so for my graduation show, instead of having a logo of this place, I ended up having all this weird, crazy sort of stuff. And what's odd is that that's really what got me to this place. So this is Pasadena, California. This is NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, and there's about 6,000 people there. I ended up showing this bottle project to a guy at Caltech. Caltech is a university in Pasadena that runs JPL, and I ended up getting to do a summer internship with all these scientists. And I really had thought I was going to go into branding, but I came away from that experience wanting to be around these people that are imagining big, big questions. And so just a little bit of geography here. So NASA has multiple centers. They're all over the place. Most people have heard of Houston, so that's where the astronauts are. They're in Texas. Other people have heard of Kennedy. That's where they launch things. In Florida, there's a bunch of other NASA centers. But that red dot is right next to Los Angeles. That's Pasadena. That's where we are. And my friends are doing insane things. They're landing robots on other planets. You may have just heard about the InSight lander that landed on Mars. Another big rover is going to land on Mars in 2020. They also use telescopes in space to help us see stars and galaxies and planets around other stars out there. And then others are helping us understand our own Earth. Most people don't know this, but at least our center, a third of our budget is actually helping us understand the planet that we all live on. But going from Art Center to there was sort of a funny little story because I met the director of the Jet Propulsion Lab, and I had 2 seconds to sell myself. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if artists were involved in brainstorming future missions? And he said, that sounds wonderful. He's a very excitable kind of guy. But he literally turned around right after I said that and walked away. And I was like, what's going on? But he scheduled his day in 7-minute increments, and so his 7 minutes were done, and he was off to the next thing. And so it's like, how do I get a hold of this person? I was sending my resume in next day air instead of like a little letter, because it's human nature. If you get a next day air thing, you open it. Doesn't matter where it's from. I wasn't around. My wife was. She went down to the store to pick up the next day air, but they didn't have the normal envelopes. They only had these gigantic envelopes. And fortunately, she sent it anyway. So she sent my little resume and in this gigantic envelope, and he sent me on to some people, and they said, oh, you go to art school. You must know how to animate. Maybe you could help us animate things. And I was like, I don't really know how to animate. I will do whatever I can do to work at a place like this. But you know this bottle project? This is like what I'm really passionate about. And that was a huge risk for me because Art Center is not cheap. And we just had a baby. My wife wasn't working anymore. And we were running out of money. But I took that risk. And fortunately, he took a risk as well. And he said, I don't understand exactly what it is that you do, but I'll give you 6 months and we'll see what happens. And fortunately, it all worked out, and that was about 16 years ago now. Now I have a team, and we actually we have 3 more places that need to be filled here pretty soon, but a bunch of amazing people that have all sorts of different backgrounds, whether it's illustration, graphic design, anthropology, and advertising. And we talk about doing a couple different types of things. One is helping people think through their thinking. So these people are really smart, right? And they're working on really complicated projects. And we sort of ask different questions than all their colleagues are asking. And many times the very first question is like, why should I care? Like, what is this thing, And they're kind of startled at first. Why should you care? Of course you should care about this thing that no one can understand. But as we keep asking those kind of branding questions of who are you, right? It really helps them think about what they're doing in a totally different way. And then we also use this phrase, sneaking up on learning, and I'll show a bit of that in a bit. There's this room that we call left field. So in America, baseball, a lot of times you'll say the idea came out of left field. And so it's usually the wacky idea. And so in this room is where they're usually beginning to think about something that might happen 10, 20 years from now. And so they're just imagining, what a mission might be like. And what's great is our team is really heavily involved in helping them brainstorm. And so sometimes that means, sort of writing on the wall things that they're saying, but other times we're throwing out ideas and we're arranging the information in lots of different ways. That's not really their skill set, is to arrange information. But whenever you arrange information in different ways, you get other types of insight into that same information. And what's cool is I worked on something probably 12 years ago, and this is a picture from the Juno mission. It's at Jupiter right now, and it's amazing to be able to think in these long-term stretches of what you're working on now might someday be doing amazing things later on. But when I first got to JPL, they were talking about trying to find planets around other stars. And I'd seen Star Trek and Star Wars, but I didn't quite, it's hard for me to believe, because they didn't have pictures of any of this stuff. And they said, we're looking for Earth-like planets around other stars. And that was even harder for me to comprehend. They'd found maybe 100, 150 planets. And they started to give me all these big numbers, like there's lots of galaxies and stars, and I'm not all that good at math. And so I had to create something to help me understand what they were talking about. And so this is a grain of sand right there. And what's great about being at a place like JPL is you could take a grain of sand to the shop and say, can you drill a hole into this grain of sand for me? And so they use a carbide drill bit to drill that little tiny hole. The grain of sand represents the Milky Way galaxy. We live in the Milky Way galaxy. There's hundreds of billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. That hole is where we live, but it's also where we found almost like 4,000 other planets around other stars right now. And we have really bad technology. We're going to find tens of thousands of more planets in that little area, let alone the rest of the galaxy. And then if you want to see all the other galaxies measured by a grain of sand, you need 60 rooms full of sand to show all the other galaxies that we know about. And what was a really special moment where I got to show this installation to someone who actually gets to point the Hubble Space Telescope places. And he looked down, and you know, sometimes people look at that and they go, wow, we're so insignificant. I hope you look at it and go, what we have here is really significant, and we need to keep good care of it. But what he said, he said, you reminded me why I work here. And that's something that, you know, you don't always get to have that moment. And you know, when they're working on these big things, it's hard to remember when you're going through bureaucracy and all the different challenges that you're going through that I'm here for a bigger reason. I don't know if any of you guys saw any of these, but these were travel posters that we created about these real places that, you know, someday, you know, if we had warp drive, maybe we could get there. So we made these travel posters as if we were travel agents trying to get you to go to places. And so Kepler, there really is a place called Kepler 16b. It really does have two suns. And so it's the land of two suns where your shadow always has company. You laughed, that's good. This one's Kepler 186f. It happens to have a different sun than ours, so the grass wouldn't be green, it'd be red. So this is Kepler 186f, where the grass is always redder on the other side. And then this last one is the one conceptually that I like the most, because the scientists didn't want to do it because they said, well, this planet doesn't have a sun. And so how do you get people to go to a planet that doesn't have a sun? Well, it's where the nightlife never ends. So it's sort of like Las Vegas. And so a little bit of the process, how we did these things, we didn't just sit there and, you know, draw this stuff out. There's a lot of people involved. We had lots of brainstorms like this. We brought in scientists, engineers, people that are writers. We even had the guy who delivers the mail because he was really smart and creative, and so we brought him part of our brainstorming session. Eventually, a guy named David Delgado sort of arranged all these different concepts, and he would, you know, try to get the headline and what the main concept and some inspiration for it. And then Joby Harris was the main illustrator, and he would sort of, you know, pencil sketch them out. We go through lots of iterations, but then it eventually turned into that. And now there's a whole bunch of them out there. There's probably, you know, 15 or so. They're all free and super high res, so you can do whatever you want to with them. And there's this whole industry that I didn't know about, is that they take everything that we make as public domain as soon as it's shared. And so people do stuff with it and sell it, and so you can buy all sorts of weird stuff with it. You can even buy a whiskey flask if you want. But this is really what it's about. Someone wrote us up and said, I'd love to acquire the posters so I can hang them in our child's nursery. My wife isn't pregnant now, but we plan to start trying in the next few months. I want my child to grow up dreaming big. And so it's wonderful to be able to have those moments. Recently, this stuff hasn't been released yet, but I can still show it to you. We made this little campaign based upon those posters. So like those posters are like 1,000 years in the future. So they're not right now. But if we were 1,000 years in the future and the projects that we're working on right now enable things to happen in the future, what would you do for fun? What are the clubs and societies of the future? And so these are all really inside sport sort of analogies. So if you worked at JPL, you would probably laugh maybe more than you guys might on some of these. But Europa is a moon of Jupiter, and it actually has twice as much water on this little tiny moon than there is on Earth. And so we thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have a Europa Scuba Club? And then, you know, coming here, maybe this makes more sense, right? And so we thought, well, if we're off of Earth all the time, you know, maybe we need an Earth bumper sticker, right? And so this happens to be the coordinates to JPL right there. This was my favorite. It's the secret order of dark matter and dark energy. And this was sort of made around the time that the 1%ers, 99%ers, those were terms that we were using. And so on the back of all these things, there's some great text. We are the 96.34% because 96.34% of the universe is actually something that we don't know what it is. It's dark matter. And the annual meeting is at the sun, Earth, L5, knock 3 times. And so anyways, everyone got these little things and they put them on their laptops, and they're really storytelling devices for them to tell their friends about what they do, because a lot of times they have a hard time explaining what it is they do. But if someone's a scuba diver, they're like, oh, what's that? And then they can start to tell the story. This was one of the posts about one of the people working at JPL just felt very proud about where they work, and that's great to be able to be part of. So we also do more physical types of things. There's a room at JPL where all the information to all the spacecraft that are at the moon or beyond. There's about 40 of them that are at the moon or beyond, whether they're from NASA or the European Space Agency or lots of other agencies. And I get a live feed from that room. And so we create the sculpture. So when lights come down, that means that at that second, we're receiving data from a spacecraft. And when lights go up, that means that we're sending data to a spacecraft. And the more light represents more data, and less light represents less data. So Voyager is a spacecraft that's been going for 40 years. It's way far out there beyond the edge of the solar system. It usually looks like it's broken when it comes up, because it can hardly send any information back and forth. But other spacecraft can send lots of data going back and forth. And so this is in the main administration building at JPL, and so every day the director can go through there and kind of get a sense of the heartbeat of space exploration at that time. And the previous director loved this thing so much that when he retired, we ended up making this little baby version for him. So, oh, isn't that cute? So hopefully someday more of these will be out in the world. The data feed is free, so and out there. So if you guys want to go do something cool with it, let me know. So this is a very visual way of dealing with that sort of information. Wanted to work on something that was different, something that was more of a sound-based piece. There happens to be all these satellites. There's 19 of them that NASA has that study the Earth. So they study our atmosphere and oceans and carbon dioxide and earthquakes and hurricanes and all these different things. But most people have no clue. They have no clue that they're up there, and you can't see them, but they're there. And so we thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if, like when you're out in the forest somewhere and you hear a bird fly across the sky, what if we could listen to where these satellites are? And so this was probably 12 years ago. It was a long time ago. Eventually, about 3 or 4 years ago, I met a guy who's a sound engineer, and he actually creates these rooms. They're called ambisonic rooms, so they're sort of surround sound on steroids. So there's speakers that are all over the place, and you can place a sound anywhere, whether it's on the ground or up above you. And so we thought, maybe we want to make a space like this. But the problem with a sound installation is that it's just a bunch of speakers, right? And how do you get people to be drawn to it? And so my buddy David Delgado, he said, we need an object of wonder. And so we ended up working with an architect, Jason Klomoski, who's in Brooklyn. And he came up with this beautiful idea, like a seashell, you can listen to the ocean, but our seashell, you can listen to the location of all these different satellites. And so a little video here, you're only hearing it in mono or stereo, but basically they gave a voice to each of the different 19 satellites, so they each have a distinct sound. And when you stand in the center, wherever you hear a sound, that's the exact location of that satellite. I've worked on a bunch of data-related projects in the past, and they tend to be very frenetic. It was fascinating collaborating with an architect and a sound designer and composer, and this one feels much more meditative. So people go in there, they bring their kids, they close their eyes, and one lady walked in there and she burst into tears, and I guess her husband had worked on one of those missions, and you know, you never know what's going to communicate to someone in a different way. And she said that she felt like he was there with her. And so that was a fun moment. I talked about the Juno mission. So Juno is at Jupiter right now, and Jupiter is not, there's no place to walk on Jupiter. You can't go for a stroll. It's if you've seen the eye of Jupiter, it's, you could put almost 3 Earths within the size of Jupiter. So it's a huge place, but it's all just a giant storm. So like all the way, you know, almost all the way down into the core. And so it's a fascinating place. So these are all storms. Everything that you see there are these amazing storms, and no one had ever seen the perspective of Jupiter like that before this spacecraft. But before it got to Jupiter, it had to, we didn't have a big enough rocket to send it all the way to Jupiter. It actually had to launch, go towards Mars, and get really, well, actually it had to come back towards the Earth, and then it had to get really, really close to the Earth and use the gravity of Earth to slingshot us out to Jupiter. And so we thought, well, man, this is a fascinating situation where a spacecraft that we built left, it went away, and then it's coming back, sort of like a boomerang, and then it's going to get slingshotted out. And we're trying to figure out, you know, is there some way that we could get people involved in this moment when everyone was, or when this thing was coming back by the Earth? And so we were thinking about various social media campaigns. But we kind of went really old school. Does anyone have an uncle or grandfather that was a ham radio operator? Anyone? And you go into this room and there's like all these weird dials. Anyways, we ended up talking with a bunch of these folks and made this project.
This is my transmitter. Maybe it's something you can use, I don't know.
The High Juno experiment is something that a group of us came up with.
The biggest challenge we had was we didn't know if this was going to work or not.
If it works, you know, I'm part of history.
This is W6JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Hello, CQ, CQ, CQ.
The Earth's flyby is Juno's way of gaining some extra speed and changing direction so that its orbit can take it to Jupiter.
We said, what if we actually sent something to Juno? Basically came up with the idea that we could send Morse code to Juno, enlist the support of amateur radio operators around the world.
So the intent is to join amateur radio community together in a coordinated transmission from Earth to the Juno spacecraft as it flies by.
The website would tell them, okay, key down now, then key up, transmit for 30 seconds. And that's how we would send a DIT. Everybody knows Morse code is dit, 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 da, da. Well, it turns out to say hi to Juno, it takes 4 DITs, then space, and then 2 DITs for the eye.
I thought, wow, that's a neat thing to do, and they're going to need a lot of people to pull this thing off. I said, I'm good to go.
We're getting ready right now. Here we go.
And now we are transmitting here.
They could hear ham radio operators all over the world doing this. which was really remarkable.
Everybody's doing this at the same time. Thousands and thousands of hams.
With any luck, the Juno spacecraft will be able to listen and hear all these amateur radio transmissions.
And so what we're doing now is we're looking at the data that's come down to see if we can put together that signal that says, hi.
Will it work? Who knows?
I have the audio from Juno. I'd love you to listen to it. Come on. This is it.
This sounds very cool.
And it actually worked, and it heard us.
When you think about what it is, it was really, really amazing.
How many times do you get to say hi to a spacecraft that's swinging by your planet?
To be a part of it, that was very great.
More than thinking about what it means to me, I think it's just such a great thing that humankind has the ability to think beyond our own environment. It's the curiosity, it's the adventuring spirit, I think, that the space program has given us.
Hi, Juno!
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno. Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno.
Hi, Juno. Goodbye. Thank you.
Okay, take 17.
Oh. Thank you. What was funny is that actually happened during one of our government shutdowns, and so it was illegal for us to tell anybody about it. Fortunately, that group of people are really close-knit, and despite the challenges that our people in our government, I'm sure you guys know something about that, it's great that these people are able to do something worldwide and something that was in a happier spirit. So ultimately, there's a guy named Erwin McManus who one time said, it's a gift and a privilege to be alive. And that's what really drives me. And when I'm doing this sort of stuff, I'm always trying to think about that. And someone showed me a little experiment that I'm going to show you guys here that makes me think about it, and hopefully it will with you as well. So this is called a cloud chamber. You can Google it. It's easy to find. It's easy to make. You can make it yourself. What you need is you need some dry ice, which they were so kind to provide. Dry ice is really, really cold, and you need gloves to hold it, and even then it's kind of cold, so I'm going to put it away. And then you need some isopropyl alcohol, and you can get those at stores. And then, so inside of this box is isopropyl alcohol, and beneath it is dry ice, so it's making this box really, really cold. And if you play around with it enough, yeah. Oh, cool. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So what happens is it makes a fog. So this is, if the box is this high, then the fog is like this high. So it's not very much. But it's not the fog that matters. Do you see little streaks going through there? Maybe, perhaps. But watch for little streaks, because those streaks are what's important. So those streaks are particles that have come from stars that have exploded. So stars explode, and hopefully you're not near one when that happens. And particles fly through the solar system or through the galaxy, and some of them make them to our solar system, and some of them make them to Earth, and some of them make them to London, and they fly through the walls of these buildings and slam into this little box and interact with this fog. And for a fraction of a second, it proves to us that there is an invisible world that's not just around us, but it's in us, because there are millions of these things that are flying through you right this second. You just can't see them. So our bodies are made of atoms. Atoms that used to be in a star that exploded. And it sent dust and atoms all over the place, and then another star exploded, another star exploded. And a bunch of these atoms all got together and became big, and it became hot. And that became our sun. And then other atoms turned into our planets. And then other atoms turned into the plants. Some of them turned into animals. But it's at this moment in galactic history that some of these atoms have become you. Some of them have become me. What you do matters. And what we do as a community matters. And this is what drives me when I wake up in the morning, and it's always asking me, Dan, what in the world are you going to do with your brief moment in time? Thank you, guys.